Bad with time. I usually either early or late, but just remind me, Matami. I'll do the last three wines of you. My name is Brevet Raats. I'm the owner winemaker for Raats Family Wines. I also founded Raats Family Wines in 2000. And then the last wine that I will taste of you is a joint venture between myself and Nzikona and BMW, our two surnames, and BMW Raats. But we'll speak about that when we get to the wine. About Raats Family Wines, I started it in 2000 after I've studied winemaking, viticulture and enology, and I've worked in Bordeaux, Italy, Germany, and for cake bread in Upper Valley. And what I found in the world is the people that was really successful is the people that specialized. So I wanted to go back to South Africa, started what I believed in, and then try to focus on that as much as possible. And the white wine variety that I picked is Chenin Blanc, and there's a Chenin Blanc seminar, those of you that was going to attend later, and you'll taste my wine there as well, and Cabernet Franc, for which I'm here to talk to you about. If we look at Cabernet Franc in South African context, there's about 0.6–0.7% of our total plantings. So most people still use it in Bordeaux blends, as most of you have tasted here today. I'm from a different opinion, and most people probably disagree with me. But I think that if you can make Cabernet Franc well and plant it on the right soil, it's one of the best single varieties that you possibly can make. And the reason why I say that is that if you compare Cabernet Franc to the other Bordeaux varieties, they all got, on the nose, they all got fruit, black or red berry fruit, they all got herbaceousness, but what Cabernet Franc has got extra, a third dimension, which is spiciness. And when the spice we talk about in Cabernet Franc is that cinnamon, clove, coriander, nutmeg, almost 5 spice, if I may say Asian spice, if we are talking about that. On the palate, Cabernet Franc tend to have very similar structure to Cabernet Sauvignon, and as we all know or might not know, Cabernet Franc is the parent variety of Cabernet Sauvignon, and one of the oldest varieties in the world that with Shiraz or Shiraz that was cultivated and made as a single variety in the Loire Valley. So with that structure that you have in Cabernet Franc, what makes it so amazing for me is that at the end you get that very silky, soft, polished tannins, you get great freshness, great acidity, and Cabernet Franc have the ability to be very precise and clear on the fruit in the aftertaste and finish. So if you take all of those components and you can have them in one wine, to me, what do you want more? And that's why I specialize in Cabernet Franc. If you look at Cabernet Franc in South Africa, as I mentioned to you, most people do use it in blends. I think the mistake that was made with Cabernet Franc is that people consider it to be a Bordeaux variety. So they planted it with the other Bordeaux varieties like Cab, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc is not. It actually comes from the Loire. And it's got a very specific need, and it's very different to the other so-called Bordeaux varieties. What I basically did is I looked at where in the world is Cabernet Franc grown that is successful. Why is it so much more successful in the right bank that compared to the left bank? Why is it successful in Hungary? Where is it successful in the US? Howell Mountain, Chalk Hill, Mount Vida. And all of them had something in common, is that Cabernet Franc needs some either chalk or dolomite in our case, or some kind of clay or chalk in the soil. It needs to be well drained, and it needs to have gravel. When you find those 3 components, and obviously medium potential, when you find those 3 or 4 components in a soil type, that usually is a good soil for Cabernet Franc. In South Africa, that I found in decomposed dolomite granite. Now you might recall Emil from the Turin, where I'm actually just 500 meters down the road from him, so we're neighbors. And you'll also meet later on today Johan Reinecke, which is a neighbor to Emil. So our 3 farms are sort of in a cluster there. And if you would have seen there, our little area, which is called Polka Dry, is on top of a decomposed dolomite granite hill. So that is where I bought my farm, and that is where I get my Cabernet Franc from. Where people mostly planted Cabernet Franc was on more the decomposed Table Mountain sandstone soil, which is much richer, much more fertile, high in clay content, and you sometimes battle to get full ripeness, maturity, not in sugar, but in ripeness of tannin in those soils. So you end up sometimes with very high alcohol levels, and the wine still has over-overt greenness in them. If you compare the wines, that will be the the third and the second last one. I think that's on 11 and 10 and 11. The 07 Cabernet Franc, 07 was a much cooler vintage. If you compare this with the 08, the following wine, you'll see that on the 07 there's more sort of that red berry fruit, that red plum, red cherry. The wine also got a slightly higher acidity, and it's much more linear in terms of the length and the finish. Compare that to the 08, which was a warmer year. I won't say 08 was particularly a hot year, but it was definitely a warmer year. You get more sort of that black plum, black cherry. The wine tends to have a bit more fullness and roundness in the mid palate, but still have that purity and great acidity with minerality on the finish. What I also want to point out, and some of the earlier speakers mentioned that the reason why we have the oldest soil or cultivated soil in the world is that during the last ice age, the only place on earth that didn't freeze up was basically southern Africa. So that was exactly 1 million years ago, if you want to factor in year or up or down. And what basically happened is if the rest of the earth froze up, and the only place that was sort of didn't freeze up was from sort of the equator down to southern Africa, and that's why people say that's the cradle of mankind, because the rest of the population on the earth basically died off because there was just snow or ice. And that's why the ice never, when it melted, never eroded the soils, and that's why they pretty much stayed static. The dolomite component in decomposed dolomite granite, and where we farmed, obviously that dolomite was the key for me. That gave me what they have in the Loire as the calcaire, or sometimes in other places like in Hungary and in Upper Valley, which was more a volcanic meltdown, but they also had chalk in their process. So I've been to most of these places, and I looked very carefully before I picked Cabernet Franc. As you probably could have figured out, I'm the only Cabernet Franc specialist in South Africa, and my colleagues tell me my position is very safe for the next 100 years. So I don't think you're going to find a lot of Cabernet Franc specialists coming out of South Africa, but as I explained to you, it's one of my passions, and I just love the wine, and I love making it, and in particular I love drinking it as well. Okay, any questions on Cabernet Franc or on Raad's family wines?
No, this is 100%, right? Cap.
Correct. Sorry, is there a little thing that we can move it forward with?
There is. Right on top there. Just behind the microphone. Right behind the microphone.
Oh, this?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a bit of a farmer. I'm not used to all these technical equipment. Oh, that's our crest. I'm going the wrong way. That was the analysis on the Cab Franc 08. And then, yes, this 100% Cabernet Franc. I use French barrels. I don't use a lot of new oak at all. Anything from 15 to 20%, and I go right up to 4th or 5th fill sometimes. I think that when you work with Cabernet Franc, it's a very delicate variety, where varieties like Cab or Shiraz or even Pinotage is all about power and boldness. Cabernet Franc is about elegance and complexity. Those are the key words when you think Cabernet Franc. Those are the things that should come up. So it's not a variety that's going to completely bowl you over on the first sip or on the first nose, but as you taste the wine over time, it will reveal the spiciness, the fruit, that beautiful minerality, as you go along and work with it. So forgive me for saying this, but I think Cabernet Franc is a bit of a thinker man's variety, is that it won't give you everything in the first go. You have to go and look and pay attention to it if you really want to see the beauty of what it has to offer. That's the analysis of the 07. And that's a ugly farmer in my tasting room. This gentleman visited me in March, and we had a lovely time there on the farm with his friends, and so he'll recognize this one. Is there any questions on Raad's family wines? Okay, and Cabernet Franc. I've got 5 minutes left, so sorry.
Well, actually, in a way, I just want to compliment you, because there's definitely herbaceousness in the nose on both of these wines.
He hasn't done it
but
yet.
there's not an iota of greenness in the mouth. And with Cab Franc, whether it's from Loire or wherever, it's so often green in the nose means green mouth, and a rather unpleasant experience, I think. But so I was a little defensive when I got the nose on this, and it was so herbaceous. I said, here comes another green Cab Franc. And yet in the mouth, it's just beautiful fruit and focused and nice, and very nice.
Thank you very much. And herbaceousness, I think if it's sort of rosemary, oregano, thyme, that kind of herbaceousness, that's positive. I want that in Cabernet Franc. It's part of the variety. But when it becomes that sort of bell pepper, green pepper, that weediness, that almost green character, it can be very off-putting. So I as long as it stays in the green herbaceous part of herbaceousness, I think it's wonderful. I say that lamb and Cabernet Franc was created on the same day, and then I think on afterthought they throw in some rosemary as well. But if you ever have Cabernet Franc with lamb and rosemary in whatever combination, it just works fantastically because of the delicacy of lamb as well. And I think that if there's a variety that will punish you if you plant it on the wrong soil type, it is Cabernet Franc. A lot of people say that Pinot Noir is the most difficult variety to make. I say they only say that because they haven't made Cabernet Franc before. And I think the challenge to get a consistent quality Cabernet Franc takes a great effort and a lot of attention in the vineyards, hence you planted it on the right soil type. Okay, we'll move over to VMW Raad's. After 2000, I sort of started Raad's Family Wines, and I was making Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc, and I thought, my job is cut out, I know where I'm going. And then in 2002, I got a phone call from a young man. His name was Nzikona Mvemve. He called me up and said he wanted to come do his practical with me. He was the first black person in Africa to get a degree in viticulture and enology, so the first qualified black winemaker in Africa. And he arrived, and I already had 2 or 3 winemakers from France and Germany lined up, and I just had to make my final decision. I spoke to him for 3 minutes, and I really liked him. He had this big, confident smile, and you could see that he wanted to go somewhere. And I said to him, "You're my man." And so he did his practical with me in 2002, and we became very good friends. And then I asked him one night at my house, if you could rub the genie as a winemaker and have one wish, what would your wish be? And he said, to make a consistent, top quality wine. I said, well, Nzikona, that's my wish as well. Let's do it together. And we agreed to that. So we started MR and VMW Raad's, which is the company, and the wine is called De Compostela, which means the compilation of stars. Now, in all fairness, we're not the first people to try to make a top consistent quality wine. How are we going to do it? So what we decided to do is take all 5 Bordeaux varieties within the demarcation of Stellenbosch and grow each variety on the correct soil type that it's well for. So we grow our Cabernet Sauvignon and our Petit Verdot on decomposed Table Mountain sandstone and derivatives of that. The Cabernet Franc and the Merlot is on decomposed dolomite granite, and we have a wonderful little block of Malbec in the Jonkershoek Valley above Stellenbosch, which is on metamorphosized slate. We then make all these components and batches and vineyards separate from each other, and we mature them separate. After a year in barrel, we line them up all blind on a table, and he rates them, I rate them, and we then score each wine. We get an average score between the two of us. This process is done completely blind, and then we line them up from the highest to the lowest average scoring wine. Everything under 90 we remove from the table. We still don't know what we have removed, and then for the first time we actually open it up to see what we have rated top. And whatever variety comes first will be the leading variety in the blend. Whatever comes second, second biggest, third biggest, fourth biggest, as we run down to a lowest component. Obviously, from that particular point, we do know what is our strongest component. Then it's a question of finding a way to blend them together, which both of us agree to and we think will make the best wine. We do everything blind, so whenever we in disagreement, we just make it up blind, taste it blind, and usually the result is very obvious. So what we try to do with the Wemwerrads Emma de Compostela is to make a wine of consistent quality and use the best possible ingredients from that particular vintage, and as much as possible from the best one and as least as possible from the weaker components. Although when I say weak, they're not really weak, but just in comparison to the others. So we didn't want to get bogged down by style. We didn't want to get bogged down by a piece of land. We didn't want to get bogged down with a variety. We tried to free ourselves from everything that can prevent us from doing the best that we can from a particular vintage. And we've released 4 vintages. 04 was our maiden release, and our 07 is our current release. Actually, the 08 was released on 1st of June, so that is on its way here to the States. We only produced 300 cases of this wine, so it's anything from 10 to 12 barrels. So it's a very tiny, limited production. 120 cases of that comes to the United States in total, and we've been exporting here since the first vintage.
Do you plant roughly the same amount of each varietal, so it's truly a fair fight?
Do I understand you correct? Do we
like 2020, 2020 of all the vineyards that you have?
No. There's also more than one batches of variety. So we've got 3 batches of Cab, we've got 2 batches of Petit Verdot, we've got 3 batches of Cabernet Franc. For instance, in 04, our first vintage Cabernet Sauvignon was the smallest component, and 06, by 40%, it was the biggest component. So it went from 0 to hero almost in 3 years' time. So there's no preconceivedness here.
Okay.
The whole process is designed not to be preconceived.
Got it.
And just focus on that particular vineyard, that particular wine in front of you, and try to make the best that you can. I think that the idea is that if 1 plus 1 becomes 2, don't make the wine. But the moment you have 1 plus 1 and it becomes 3, then you have Emma de Compostela. So both Nzukona and myself believe that doing this together, we will make a better wine than doing it individually on our own. So it's really a collaboration between 2 friends, 2 winemakers that try to make something bigger than themselves.
Thank you.
So from there, how do you treat it in the winery in terms of your maceration and fermentation, etc.?
Good question. After we made the final blend, we then take it back to barrel, usually 3rd and 4th fill. So in the first part, we'll have a small new component in all the components, and then after that, we'll only take it back for another anything from 9 to 12 months. So the wine usually spend anything from 22 to 24 months in barrel. But the second part is not an oak extraction phase, it is a maturation phase and an integration phase. And then after that, we usually bottle it and then try to keep it in the bottle for 12 to 18 months before we release the wine. So that's why I just been released.
I just want to maybe digress just a little bit. My time in South Africa, I was expected, you guys are making great wines on a world-class level, but I was expecting to maybe encounter more Pinotage, since all I read was that it was the grape that South Africa was making indigenous to there, and I didn't taste as much as I thought I would. Is there a reason for that, maybe?
I think that, like with anything, I mean, where Zinfandel is considered the unique variety of the US, not everybody makes Zinfandel. And I think very much us, there's people that Pinotage believers and Pinotage specialists, and they do it. I mean, I think we're quite a diverse culture, and we all sort of got our ideas of what we want to do and do it that way. So, but pinotage is definitely an integral part of South Africa, our industry, and definitely the pinotage specialist is as passionate as you can get, but not for everybody. So, but definitely it's got a role to fill, and I think in the future pinotage will become more important in the roadmap for South Africa in the future. I'm going to finish now. Just 1 second. What I think is very important for myself, for Raad's Family Wines, and for Nzakona and myself, is that South Africa produce wines of unique character that are true to the soils that we farm on. It doesn't help that we're trying to become something that we're not, or try to imitate or copy anybody else in the world. The only way we will earn our respect and earn our individuality and our place in the wine world if we make things that are different and individual and true to the soils that we farm on. Thank you for your time and attention.